The Montgomery College Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program is a unique collaboration between the Paul Peck Humanities Institute and Smithsonian's Office of Educational Technology. This unique professional development opportunity encourages community college faculty to teach with the Smithsonian. In 2022, the program hit a milestone anniversary, celebrating 25 years, 235 faculty fellows, and more than 25,000 student visits to Smithsonian museums. Professor Jona Colson teaches in the English Language for Academic Purposes program at the Tacoma Park Silver Spring campus, where he teaches writing, reading, and speech to non-native speakers. He earned a BA in English and Spanish from Goucher College, an MFA in poetry from American University, an MA in linguistics from George Mason University, and an English as a Second Foreign Language certification from Servicios Lingüísticos in Madrid, Spain. In addition to teaching, he is an active poet and translator who has numerous publications in recognized journals and anthologies. In 2018, his debut collection of poetry, Said Through Glass, won the Gene Feldman Poetry Award from the Washington Writers Publishing House. His work has appeared in the Southern Review, Lit Hub, the Writers Chronicle, and many other publications. His interests include poetry and L2 learning, and he is currently co-president of the Washington Writers Publishing House.
So my project was the personal and the political, in a visit to the National Museum of American History, which is where we went to in the past fall. So the course that I used was a course called ELAS 980, which is an advanced listening and speaking course for non-native speakers of English. And we focus on listening to lectures, giving presentations, and effective communication. And two objectives that were met by this assignment were to participate effectively and appropriately and present by discussing basic points and opinions, easily met by the Smithsonian Fellowship, and to independently create presentations with supporting documents, which you'll see in the course of this presentation what my students did. They were very excited to do this too. So I had a few parts to this presentation. This first part was the assignment for the National Museum of American History. I presented them with, as we discussed in a lot of the meetings that we had for the Smithsonian, talking about object-based learning and ways in which to look at objects and to interpret objects, with all the wonderful presentations that we had from the curators at the Smithsonian. And so we had a sort of a mini lesson before we went down to the museum. But here's what they had to do once they got to the museum. And we went down. This was a remote course. It was an SRT ELAS 980. So we all met on Zoom. So we went down during a weekend. And this was the first time that many of my students in a few years, and many of them are new, the first time they actually met their fellow classmates in person. And it was just wonderful. It was a Saturday afternoon, and there were hugs, and they were like, oh, you look taller than I thought, or like, oh my gosh, that's what you look like. And, because we all have a perception of ourselves on Zoom, and for them to meet each other was just absolutely wonderful. And you'll see how it really builds community within your class as well. In addition to everything else that you're doing around it, it builds a community. And I really feel like some of these connections that were made during my fall class will last for a lifetime, which is really, really wonderful. So the first thing they had to do, part one of my project, was they had to find an object in the museum that speaks to a larger moment in history. So once we got to the museum, I gave sort of my guided tour of the highlights, Jona's favorite exhibits. So we saw Julia Child's kitchen, the Food Museum, which is one of my favorites. We went up to and saw the First Lady's dresses, which you'll see, which came along. We saw the American flag. So I took them around and gave them like a brief orientation of the museum, which I think was really, really helpful, because then I had a center space, right? I was in the lobby. I was like, okay, when you're finished, please come back in and check with me. I am here, across from the gift shop, which is where everyone knows. So it was a lot of fun to give sort of an orientation to the museum, and then sort of release them and let them go in the museum and see what they chose. And we were there for about 2 or 3 hours. So again, they had to find an object in the museum that speaks to a larger moment in history. And think about, does the object reflect any social movement in the USA? Does the object focus on a particular time or place? What can visitors learn from this object? And how does it maybe represent the past and move us forward? They did not have to focus on all of these questions for their presentation, but just have them in mind when they were going around in the museum, different floors, different exhibits, and just think about, they had these questions in front of them. I printed them out, and they were able to take a look at them as they moved through the museum. That was the first part. And then it came in and checked with me, and they had a top 3. So I said, okay, at least find 3 objects or 3 exhibits that you feel could be something you would like to present about. So they came in and checked with me on their top 3. And then the second part of the assignment was to sort of mirror that object, right? So what is your object? So they had to sort of choose an object from their own personal life, from something, in their bedroom, in their house, something that's in their life that could sort of match whatever object they chose in the museum. So think about, what is your object? How does it relate to the object in the museum? Why is your object important to you? And does your object relate to any social movement, maybe in this country or in your own country? And then, of course, they had to give a presentation, right? They had to create an outline and a PowerPoint, and they had to record the presentation on Flip, which is an online recording and discussion platform, which is amazing, and it keeps advancing forward, and I really highly recommend it. If anyone has questions about that, please let me know. Or they could present live in class. So I gave them the option of doing Flip, record it if they wanted to, maybe they were a little more introverted, or if they wanted to present live in class, they were able to do that. And I had about half and half, which is kind of fun. And I'll show you 2 flips and 1 live. So here are some pictures of us at the National Museum of American History. Of course, you take the obligatory photograph in front of the Star-Spangled Banner exhibit, but also my favorite exhibit, as I mentioned before, is a food exhibit. And I always show them a brief clip of Julia Child making an omelet from one of her TV shows, so that they can understand the importance of Julia Child, and seeing that wonderful, her kitchen there in the museum, which is one of my favorites ever, and I will never get tired of visiting that exhibit. So the first example I would like to share with you is from Elizabeth, and she chose a Nintendo game center, game database, which was at the National Museum of American History. And I'll just share with you a very brief part of her presentation, and then we'll talk about some of her major points that she shared.
The video game is a significant innovation in US history. It changes the way that people are entertained. It creates a new and fun environment for both children and adults. It also creates a new way for US propaganda, education, and army weapon demonstration. First, the US has a large game culture. From children to adults, people like to play video games.
Alexia said that people like to play video games. I did like to play video games. I had that same Nintendo set when I was growing up in the late 1980s. So one of the things she does is she discusses the significance of the video game popularity in the USA and our home country of China. She focused on how the video game is available to almost everyone and seems to be a very popular and accessible way in order to play, but it also has some stereotypes. And she focused on, later in her presentation, how there are very few female heroes in those video games. And one of the things she recognized is how we can move ourselves forward by integrating more female heroes in these video games and empower the women in these cultures and move the cultures forward. I thought was really, really interesting. So she matched that Nintendo with her own video game device. Another example is Salam. She came with her 2 children to the museum, which was wonderful, and they really actually enjoyed the museum as well, and we had a really wonderful time. And she matched her object with, of course, one of the most famous things that you see in the Smithsonian Museum, which is Michelle Obama's inaugural dress, which is one thing that everybody wants to see. It's totally beautiful and gorgeous. And the shoes are there, and the some jewelry is there as well, which is a little rare, which is totally great. So one thing that I love some of these quotes that she suggested here is Michelle Obama's inaugural gown represents for me the continuing struggle to be a woman of color in the United States. And the dress gives me hope that my children can be anything they want to be in this country, which is wonderful, right? I mean, that's sort of why we're doing this. And she also said that as we discussed in class, the Black Lives Matter movement is about, sharing the true stories of prejudice and discrimination and to empower the people of color. And I love this. This dress empowers me, right? That someone seeing this dress can be empowered by that dress. And it's a very powerful exhibit. And she matched it with her own wedding gown. The last is from Fabricio. Fabricio is from Peru. And he visited, which was new to me, and I just briefly went through the new exhibit at the National Museum of American History called Presente, a Latino History of the United States. And this something that I actually missed as I went through the exhibit the first time was a Peruvian passport from 1923. And he is from Peru, and he initially latched onto this, which is so wonderful because I missed it. And that's sort of great. What students can do is often highlight some objects that you forget, that you don't see. And they're sort of brought to light and highlighted in these wonderful presentations. So what he decided to do was take a look at this passport, and he matched this object with his own Peruvian passport. So forgive the video here. It's a little, because he did a live presentation. So I was doing a recording of a recording of a recording. So forgive this, but it's still a very interesting presentation here. And I'll show two brief clips of this.
Okay, this is a presentation. So good evening, Professor and classmates. So the following is about the Peruvian heritage in the American culture. The findings that I found in the visit that we made in the weeks ago, right? So the thing that was a surprise for me is actually I shared with you guys in the chat is this Peruvian passport in the museum. Actually, as you know, there is a Latin heritage special presentation in the museum.
Well, I'll stop it there. I'll show the next one as well. So I love, he chose this, which again was a sort of a surprise to me because I did not know that it was there. But talking about immigration as a continuing experience and debate in American culture. And I'll just show a very brief moment.
What is the meaning or the significance of this passport for the immigration that is happening all the world? And sorry, it's happening all the time all the world. It's not an issue in nowadays. It's happening, in these days, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, for the beginning of the civilization. The people just start to immigrate.
So we focused on the idea of course, immigration, which is always a social and political issue, and our students, specifically in the ELAS program, are constantly sort of in discussion with and with dialogue. So I really appreciated his, and of course, the theme for this of the pandemic and social movement really embraced this idea of his presentation, which I really appreciated. So here's some other images from some other presentations. Some other students chose the backpack and the shoes that were in one of the exhibits, which is very, very powerful, people crossing the border. Someone chose an image of the boat that carried from Cuba to Miami, and two other some of my students chose the Michelle Obama inaugural gown and related it to their own gown, specifically their wedding gown, which is really interesting. But there were many other wonderful presentations that I don't have time to share. So of course, my students enjoyed the museum and made some great connections from the objects and really related it to social awareness. And again, there was such a wonderful engagement in the museum, and there was community building. And after we went to the museum halfway through the semester. And when we came back to even our Zoom class, I felt like there was just more connection within all of us. And it was a wonderful experience and community building. And I really appreciate being a part of this project once again. So thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.